All right, welcome back to the show. I'm excited to have two fantastic people here today. We have John Happ, CEO of Pressure Core, and Mihir Desu, president of Pressure Core. Pressure Core makes zero carbon baseload power out of waste pressure in pipelines. And they are enabling customers to use no CapEx to provide this lower cost power and provide meaningful, low carbon, sustainable as a sustainable solution. We're excited to have you here. I heard you were in Canada recently.
I was.
Yeah,
yes.
Tell us about that.
Oh, we had a couple of good turns there. Actually, we were in Chicago at the University of Illinois in Urbana before that, getting our first deployment, squared away. They've got a location there and very avant-garde in the sustainability space. They have a gas plant, which our offering fits very well in front of. We're putting in a project there, and I'm sure we'll get to talk, a little bit more about it. In Canada, we were selected in the Creative Destruction Lab for the Rockies, which was put on by the University of Calgary. Very prestigious invitation to be invited there to go through that. And it's very well run. Every one of the mentors in that group for startups is an energy person and, kind of understands the vernacular and, the nomenclature that we use and our offering. Whereas other places that we've been, people don't know how to spell Delta P, So that was very refreshing. We did make it to the next round. I'm happy to report. Saw quite a few customers. Alberta, Canada, Calgary is a very, sister community to Houston as far as the oil and gas is concerned. And saw quite a few customers. And then at the end of the week, we had been chosen as the top 50 investable startups in Calgary in the sustainability space through Foresight, and had a booth and spoke at that conference as well.
Yeah. No, shout out to Creative Destruction Lab. They're fantastic. And they're not just energy people. They are the energy people of like Alberta in terms of the mentors. So very high quality. Right.
I'll second that. Yeah. It was an amazing time, very well run, and a very astute audience, I would say.
Yeah. So, did you make it up there, Mihir?
No, I let John and Jay handle that. I'm not one for the cold weather, so.
Yeah. Did you live in Calgary at one point?
No. Okay. I grew up in the East Coast in New England.
Okay, that's right.
So I ran away as fast as I could.
Okay, yeah. Back down here. You're actually the second one from the northern East Coast we had here. We had Andrew Lane, who came from Pennsylvania here last week, and so we're collecting all the Appalachians. But so tell us a little bit more about the solution. So we know it extracts power from pressure, but tell us more about where this actually goes and where the magic happens.
Yeah. So I like to use a couple different analogies. So one is it's essentially regenerative braking for pipelines, right? So whenever you have your car, you're coming off the highway, putting the brakes on in a EV or a hybrid, that friction loss, that energy is recycled into the battery. So similarly, when you have molecules traveling down a pipeline, when they need to be depressurized, they run through our system and we're able to expand it and depressurize it in the process, while spinning a turbine to extract that lost energy that would otherwise be lost on the system. And so it's kind of like a hydro turbine just within a gas pipeline.
Yeah, and in layman's terms, it's where a high pressure pipeline comes into either a gas plant or a utility company. Picture in your mind's eye, you have a pipeline from Midland to Houston. You pressure that pipeline up to move the hydrocarbon at 1,200 pounds. Along about Kerrville, you stop compressing. When you get to Houston, you're still at 600 pounds, but you've let natural pressure drop take over. Sadly, you can only get into center point at 300 pounds. So there's 300 pounds of wasted pressure that we use to make zero carbon baseload power. It doesn't depend on when the sun shines or the wind blows. It's there 24/7.
And what are you replacing? What are they doing today to do the pressure reduction?
So they're using generic valves.
Okay.
And there's a few different names for it, but kind of like the category is a Joule-Thomson valve. And Joule-Thomson is this thermodynamic effect where when you expand a gas, you are also reducing the temperature. The vice versa is also true. And so our system, we actually not only are able to move around that. So we don't replace it by design because we want to ensure that the operations team has a lot of fail safes in case anything goes wrong. But because of that Joule-Thomson effect, they precondition the gas before it goes through the valve. And a lot of people don't realize this. They actually take gas from the pipe, burn it, combust it to heat up the gas before it goes through that valve.
Oh, so it ends up on the other side, not frozen.
Exactly. Exactly. You don't want hydrate formation, anything that can be corrosive to the pipeline. And so we use, instead of combustion, we use thermal exchangers if there's a waste heat source, which generally there is, or heat pumps. And so in that manner, we're able to avoid that scope 1 emissions. And then a lot of these valves, they're using these gas pneumatic actuators. So they're basically using this high pressure gas to move the valve up and down. And when they're done moving the valve up and down, they vent that gas into the atmosphere, right? So it's methane emissions. And our system also avoids those as well because we don't use those gas pneumatic valves. And the core component, the turbo expander, is hermetically sealed. So not a lot of exposure to the atmosphere.
Yeah. And I think the other technical thing I heard was you called it baseload power. And does that mean it's consistent because people are always consuming the same amount of gas? Or is it baseload because you're just kind of getting the power you're getting? I guess tell me about how you're describing that.
Yeah, so by baseload, we mean the capacity factor of our system is dependent on the gas flow coming through the pipe. And generally, the most economic sites are when gas is flowing most consistently. And so we see, upwards of 80% capacity factor. Most of our systems are between that 85-95% capacity factor.
Versus like solar, which would be like 30%, 20 or 30%.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe a peaking power plant would be even less. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And would you install such a solution in legacy systems, or, is it mostly for new systems that are coming online?
It's mostly for legacy systems. Okay. For example, some of the largest companies in the world have given us their data. It's very easy for a host customer to find out what they can expect and how many sites they have. For example, TransCanada gave us, just in the lower 48, 3,000 sites to look for delta P or pressure drop. 250 of those sites were very fit for purpose. So they've got 70 to 80 megawatts that they have as a waste pressure asset.
And so what's an average power rating for site? I'm sure it's site dependent, depending on how much flow. Yeah. What do you think about as like a typical installation?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Each site, the energy generation potential is a factor of the flow, the pressure differential of the inlet, the outlet pipe, the temperature differential of the inlet, the outlet, and then the composition of the gas. And so we've built software to basically take in all those factors and output a theoretical energy potential number. So, obviously the physical system can't always generate the theoretical potential, but if we have, let's say, a megawatt of theoretical potential, we can extract, like 900 kilowatts. On average, our systems are between that 600 to 1.2 megawatt range.
It's important to point out that, we look for creative ways to help the host customer. So as low as 125 kilowatts up to 3.5 megawatts can be on one skid. We're skid mounted. And so these turbo expanders can be put, in series or in parallel and stacked up to get to that 3.5 megawatts. But it is economic all the way down to, 125 kilowatts. But what we look for, to Mihir's point, is the pressure ratio.
Yep.
So 1.2 to 1 is the average.
That's lower than I would have expected.
It is.
It's kind of the minimum. Yeah.
Okay.
I tell, that's why we ask people like TransCanada, don't go through the Easter egg hunt to find places where delta P is. Let us do that. Because engineers, even us, when we first started, we're like, we're looking for, grandiose, amount of pressure drop. These sites are, it is an Easter egg hunt. I'm often surprised on just how low the delta P has to be if the flow is high, or vice versa. If the flow is high, the delta P can be low.
I heard you say another nugget. Depends on the gas. So that means not necessarily natural gas. Could be
CO2.
I was like CO2 was my first thought, right? Or is that the other main constituency?
Yeah. So, there's different alloys that's required on like hydrogen pipelines. But yeah, the same conceptual system, with some components changes, could work on carbon dioxide pipelines, hydrogen pipelines. And then we have a different apparatus that can work on liquids pipelines as well. So crude oil, butanes, ethanes, ammonia, like all that stuff too.
One of the things we outlined to the host customers is, if you were ever to take the natural gas pipeline out of service and make it into a CO2 pipeline, our offering will still continue to work.
Interesting.
Tell me about how you stumbled on this solution. You formed a Pressure Core about a year ago. So what was that point, that moment?
I think here's the best answer to that. They've been looking at it for a little bit longer than a year. Turbo expander technology has been around a long time. It's not a new process, but the hermetically sealed, magnetic bearing aspect, that's been the step change in turbo expanders that have made this offering or this deployment novel. These units exist in almost every refinery in the world because Delta P is so locale specific there. It's the pipeline application that is novel.
Yeah. So as John mentioned, like the technology's been around, and then this waste energy stream has also been around for decades, right? Like the technology was invented in the 1920s, and then in like the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, there was like a series of turbo expander deployments, but they were bespoke custom units. And eventually all of them, not only did they stop working because of the high maintenance required, but they actually got decommissioned and pulled out because they were so bothersome to operations. So,
and I think, going back to your question, and it'll answer a little bit what your question is, Delta P goes like this, even though it is an 85 to 95% capacity factor that we look for, but it still moves up and down. And the deployments that Mihir's talking about, they engineered for the high and the low. Well, no moving engine, reciprocating engine works efficiently at the highs and lows. We take the core out of the watermelon. We're taking the very center out. And that's that cookie cutter aspect that makes it economic for the host customer. So while a site might be able to make 900 kilowatts, it may be better to only put 300 kilowatts in there because you're abating carbon at a higher rate. You're getting cheaper power. So
that's part of your assessment is identifying where that capital efficiency is going to be.
Yeah, and that's kind of the IP of where we've got some patent pendings on how we're showing the power output to the host customers. It is these algorithms that we run through our software to show, okay, this is how many sites you have. This is how much power you can expect at these locations. And you might even have a little a la carte out there. You can make 921 kilowatts and you'll abate carbon at 2,800 tons per year. But your power price will be 11 cents. If you put 300 kilowatts in, you'll only abate 1,700 tons of carbon, but your power price will be 7 cents. So there is a little bit of a la carte that we show these customers.
Okay. And you can align on with either their financial goals or their decarbonization goals.
That's right.
That's
I'm
really
often
tough.
surprised on how many of them say, I want to abate carbon at a higher rate. So good on them.
Yep. Interesting.
Yeah. And how does that work in terms of, do you need to then, because the energy produced goes back into the grid or do you use it for whatever you might need to use it depending on where the pipeline is?
Yeah. So ideally, we're working with customers that can use the electricity generated behind the meter.
Yeah.
So we don't have to interconnect. But if we do, if there's not enough load behind the meter, there's kind of a series of options that we can take. So one is interconnecting to the grid. Luckily, these systems are relatively small on a grid basis. And so we qualify for a lot of expedited interconnection processes. So we don't have to wait in line. And the common refrain that you get from interconnection is kind of for these larger projects. So we generally don't have to worry about that. And then if we have trouble interconnecting, or we're doing this kind of cost benefit analysis with potentially bringing a load to the site, right? So like mobile data centers, we're working on an integration with electrolyzers, and it's pretty cool because electrolyzers produce heat, whereas we produce cooling. And so by having a thermal loop between the two, we can kind of use the cooling to cool the electrolyzer and the heat from the electrolyzer to condition the gas before it goes through our system.
And it's one thing that I hope that the host customers see as a benefit for us. We see, customers, that have made promises to be carbon neutral by a certain time. And, that was a couple of years ago, their boards are asking, what have you done? And they haven't done anything, right? So this is something that can be put homogeneously on their system, do better with what they have. And I think a lot of it is these C-suites don't know where their credit getting place is, or how am I assured that I'm going to get all of the environmental attributes that I'm after. And plus, I'm not in the power business. Well, that's our day job, right? So we come in and say, look, in the case of New York, they have a value stack pricing there. I would much rather connect into the grid in New York because the pricing is higher, even if there is a host load, right? But our preferred way to do it is behind the fence. That's first and easiest. But in some places, it's better, and that's where we come in and tell you at each location, these are your options.
Interesting. And I think clarify, so you're bringing together technology, but really you've identified sites and you put a wrapper around kind of the product, or do you provide product? Do you provide services? What is the business model?
Yeah, great question. So we've worked on this a bit depending on customer requirements. And so we have kind of 3 commercial models. We can build, own, and operate. So for customers that don't want to deploy their own CapEx, they don't care to maintain or operate it, we'll do the full package, and then we'll just either charge you a lease payment or a PPA. In fact, a lot of customers prefer the lease because they don't want to put restrictions on the flow of gas through a pipe. And if we have a PPA, typically there needs to be some sort of minimum commitment. So a lot of them prefer the lease, but some customers, they just want to purchase the system and then do the installation and operation themselves. And then the third option, which is typically what we've seen regulated utilities be or prefer, which is the turnkey project development. So we'll, design and build the skid, bring it to site, install and commission it, and then we'll just sell it to the customer after it's commissioned. So they don't have to take the development risk, but they can still deploy their own CapEx.
And how has the uptake been in the industry? And secondly, how have you taken advantage of, the IRA and the infrastructure bill, and how has that helped you?
I'm a usual suspect energy professional. I was a power trader for a long time, and sold a company called South Cross Atarga last year, and my next purchase was going to be in the sustainability sector, right? But it had to have some caveats to it. It had to be something that was scalable, ready now. It couldn't be pixie dust way over the horizon, something that was fictional, and it didn't have to rely on subsidy. Now, the subsidies are great. Having the ITC, which we do qualify for, the 40% ITC, can move that cash forward, and it allows us to pass that back to the host customer. A lot of our offering is to make sure that they get all of the environmental attributes that they're looking for. They're sponsoring a program, a project that qualifies for the ITC. They can put that in their 10Ks, annual reports, their board meetings, to show that they're actually doing stuff. And in a lot of cases with those scope 1 and 2 emissions, we do qualify for RINs or RECs, depending on what locale you are in the country. And you abate carbon at a very high rate. Just anecdotally speaking, 1 megawatt deployment will, over the life of the contract, abate 65,000 tons of carbon.
And that's just scope 2.
Yes. And so, if your internal price of carbon is only $70, that's $5 million that you didn't spend. And, to talk about our model, our development model, is that we're putting in the capital, selling back the power, and, capacity lease is our preferred method to do that. And the host customer can expect to buy cheaper than grid power. So not only did they not use their own CapEx, they're buying power cheaper than what they were buying it for before from the grid.
So they're tripping over themselves to give you contracts, is what I'm hearing.
That's what we hope.
What are the challenges? Yeah.
The challenges is just, bureaucratic processes, right? The internal sales cycle of these large organizations, it just takes a while for us to get the right stakeholder buy-in. And so, it's really I would say intricate sales process, right? We definitely need a champion internally, but there's also a few different groups that we need buy-in, right? There's a kind of low carbon sustainability group that needs to be pushing it. There's the business unit that's actually hosting the facility. So whether that's like an operating facility or, you know, a regulated pipeline business, that's who we're selling to in TC. And then, you know, there's kind of like the finance group as well, who can provide, you know, either equity, tax equity if they have tax liability, and of course like executive leadership too, which is why, you know, it was really a coup for us to bring John on board because of all his relationships that he's built over, you know, the past few decades working in the industry.
Yeah. Is there like a sense of like technology risk?
No,
because a lot of this stuff already exists, right?
It is, and so that's kind of, you know, what gravitated me toward this offering. Like, I understand the technology, and it's easy for me to go into my, you know, compatriots and say, "Look, dum-dum, you can't put your head in the sand. You know this works." I know that you know, midstream companies, and I'll say this jocularly, are getting drug kicking and screaming into the sustainability side. You know, admittedly, they're not moving as fast as you know, folks would like. And our offering is, you know, elective surgery. That's why we have to get a lot of stakeholders in. But we're able to get over the, "You're not putting this on my system. You shut down my plant. I'm showing up at your house," right? Well, you know, we give the host customer a slam valve. So we know how to obfuscate those anxieties. You know, we put it in parallel. It's not something that could ever, you mash the slam valve, 2 seconds later, it goes back to the way it was before you ever met us. And, you know, Mihir made that point earlier, is we're not trying to encumber their operating conditions at all. We want them to operate exactly the way they did before, but be able to make some clean, zero carbon power out of it.
And so it sounds like in some ways, I mean, this is an education problem. You've only been at it for a year, right? And industrial projects usually take more than a year to sell, right? Because you have to educate a lot of these stakeholders, and I'm sure they're just trying to wrap their head around what their strategy is for decarbonization, and maybe they don't know what to think yet, right?
Yeah, candidly, I mean, I think, you know, once we get the business unit or the engineers that are actually running it on board, right? Then you have to, you know, then it is getting to the sustainability crew and the, you know, the folks that are pulling the purse strings, even though we're coming to pay for it.
And in your experience so far, is it easier, you know, convincing perhaps these smaller operators than these bigger ones, which, you know, have a lot of bureaucracy, and you often don't know if you're talking to the right person. And I know, you know, having worked in these big corporations, that they don't make decisions very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I think our approach until recently has been just like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. We've, you know, John and myself and some of our team have been focusing on some of the larger companies, but then we've also hired some originators from John's past workings to go after some of these smaller customers as well.
Originators,
so meaning like folks that can
BD guys.
Like originators reminds me of banking, but I guess not that different.
Yeah, originating a project versus originating a loan.
You know, I know you can't see this, but we have a very brisk, you know, pipeline, you know, of customers that are far down, you know, down the way, and some of them are big, some of them are small. I think, you know, whether right, wrong, or indifferent, you know, we've been kind of waiting to get our first deployment till we go and reach out to some of the larger companies. The TC came from a very close friend at the company, and, you know, we're meeting with Kinder Morgan tomorrow, and, you know, I can't put that guy off anymore, but I want to make sure that we have something tangible to show them when we get there, you know.
So where are you now in terms of, you know, your concept and your demonstration?
We're at the finish line with UIUC. That's where we were last week. You know, we're running a feasibility study. You know, when a host customer gives us and what we do ask for some very specific data, and that's another thing that, you know, getting the data from the host customer. We ask for 24 months of hourly inlet pressure, outlet pressure, temperature, flow, and a gas analysis. Armed with that, I'm able to give you a P90 estimate that these sites will work. Barring an indigenous burial site or the horned-toed frog, we have a site that works. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, we're but you still have to go and get a engineered feasibility study to make sure it just didn't come from our engineers, even though we have some very talented engineers on staff. The host customer needs to see a professional engineered stamp on it, and then we move forward, and that's where we are.
Yeah. So you said something, maybe folks not from the energy industry wouldn't know it is. You said a P90 financial study. So explain to those of us who don't know what that means.
I use it in a liberal way. Sorry, like I'm more than 90% sure that this site will be fit for purpose.
Yeah.
Barring some, maybe there's a space requirement that we don't know about. And we've got to go look at it. And I wasn't kidding. If you're displacing the horned-toed frog, you can't build it there.
Yep.
Or some sort of.
Yeah, you got to underground some power lines, and it kills economics. Something like that.
Okay, so really good confidence that this will work from a financial perspective.
Yeah.
Basically 90% probability confidence that we're able to go forward.
So have you done some pilots with some of these customers?
We don't. Pressure Corp does not have a deployment, but there are Toho Gas in Japan. So our OEM provider that sells us the turbo expander, Toho Gas bought those, and we helped them with their deployments and their. So we were along for the ride. It just wasn't our model, and we don't own them. But there are 9 of them in Japan.
Yeah, there's one or a few in Italy too. Yeah.
So this one's going to be the big one to unlock the follow-on customer.
Right. That's our that we've been able to bolt together metal on the ground.
Yeah. Good. And when's that going to come online? In a year or sooner?
It'd be like 6-7 months.
That's pretty good.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah.
P90.
Once the engineering study's done.
I'm listing P90 on that one.
Yeah. No, I recall, I guess when we were chatting a year ago, there was you're just starting out on that journey of kind of engaging with customers and throwing everything on the wall. And so it's fantastic to hear kind of getting, marching forward, and getting uptake. And that first one's always the hardest.
Yeah, we're still alive.
Yeah.
So that's what matters.
It's not over till it's installed. That's the other thing, right?
Right.
So, there's still plenty more work to do. At least you're targeting an installation theoretically when it's not terribly cold. I did my first turbine installation when it was negative 36 in North Dakota. I was like, oh, this is exactly what I want to be doing. It was very cold.
That's brutal.
So, yeah.
And what's your funding journey been like so far, and what's your strategy going forward?
Yeah. Well, one of the big benefits of bringing John on board was also the fact that he put in the first capital into the company. So, that brought us a long ways in terms of de-risking. And then earlier this year, we raised a pre-seed round, about $800K from a couple angels that have taken us through, and we're currently fundraising as well to get this first project into the ground. Yeah,
no, I mean, eventually the goal is to become bankable. If you look at the advanced BD pipeline, you'd take every credit. They're all credit-worthy companies, and so once we get a few under our belt and show that we are, we believe that we'll be able to borrow from the usual suspect banking arrangements. So careful about selling equity is really where that comment was.
That makes sense, because I think with the kind of solution you have, if you get enough customers on board, they'll be funding a lot of the solution, right?
Yeah, it depends on the customer. For example, the regulated utilities where they make money by deploying capital, they want to own the projects, right? But a lot of customers, so I mean, TC is a regulated utility, but they're a bit capital constrained right now. So they actually prefer someone else deploy capital for projects like these.
Yeah, and it depends on the kind of the culture of the company. Like some companies are like, we're not going to do sustainability projects unless they make us money. Well, that's one of the things that we're really offering them. It's it's a huge cost savings to you. You're not deploying your own capital, and you're abating carbon at a very high rate.
Yeah.
there are some, speaking of the journey and what you intend to have as a financing vehicle, there's some elegant and kind of esoteric structures that can work because of the IRA, like tax equity, partnerships, and things like that. Unlock a box of dollars or a bucket of dollars that we would like to have our investor be able to get, and that comes with investment tech partnership.
And it's a really interesting part of our business is like, how do you finance the projects? Like most of the startup world, you think about different venture rounds and financing the venture round, raising capital for that. So we're kind of working in this nexus. Like we do need some seed capital, right, to get the business going. But once we have enough of a pipeline, John mentioned the tax equity, but there's also debt. There's different components of that capital structure that allow those projects to move forward without us having to raise more capital on balance sheet, right? So there's this kind of aversion in venture capital to like capital heavy businesses. Well, if you unlock project finance in the right way, you're not necessarily capital heavy from like a corporate equity standpoint.
Absolutely. And not all startups need to be venture backed.
Yeah.
Right. So it's also being able to identify, because I was thinking, you've probably done your calculations on this, like, what is the return of investment for, one of these midstream companies when they come on board? How long does it take for them to recuperate the investment that they made?
Well, I can speak to what our commercial model is. We're about a 4-year payout. We look for rates of return 15 to 20%, and usual suspect energy returns.
Yeah. So it does depend on the customer side how much capital that they outlay for a given project, their returns, and that's why we have these different commercial structures, right? So for a company that is not deploying any capital, it's an infinite rate of return because they're getting power savings or the clean energy or carbon credits, and so it just kind of depends on what their capital appetite is.
Yeah.
So one of the elegant solutions, and it's not a financing solution, but that we have taken out to one or two of our customers that have a portfolio, they have lots of megawatts to deploy, or over 100 sites. We said, look, we'll come pay you up front so that you're always in an accretive position. We'll give you $15 million, and we'll go over 5 years and deploy these units on your system. We'll put rank them, make the best first, and then we'll pay you up front, and we get a preferred payout on that.
Yeah, so it's kind of like securing mineral rights or resource rights, right? So we're experimenting with those types of structures to get some of these customers in the door.
Yeah, and then you said you closed your pre-seed round, $800K. How has fundraising been in Houston for you? Was it easy to come by?
I guess where were your angels? For your angels?
Yeah.
They were here from here, both.
Yeah. Both of them were here.
Yeah, it wasn't, I mean, I wouldn't say easy. It was a very successful seed round, and we kind of, backed off of taking more than that. We probably could have taken a lot more, but it's that tightrope of equity versus what our, debt financing might look like. And to your question, are we looking at the smaller customers or the larger customers? Well, our cap table will look a lot different if we get 80 megawatts as our second or third customer versus the onesies and twosies as we go along. We'll just need to figure out how to finance that tranche while we're growing up. And then, but if you got one big one, I think there'll be people that would like to finance those.
So it sounds like you didn't go to the angel groups. How did you find the angels themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, one of our angels, his name is Jeff Bishop. He's a founder of Key Capture Energy, which is one of the biggest standalone energy storage developers, and so he was really bullish on what we're doing and had a lot of the foresight and knowledge about how development works, and thought what we're doing was pretty cool. So he gave us that backing, and then
high net worth individuals, you know, that know that, you know, we've put metal on the ground before. And one very astute friend of mine, Jesse Marion, owns a cathodic protection company. So he's very familiar with this type of customer that we're dealing with, and likes the offering, and was willing to get behind it.
Yeah, and cathodic protection is just anti-rust coatings for pipelines.
Yeah.
Right. So he's selling to pipeline companies too.
Yeah, he understands the customer.
Yeah.
I because I was there, we don't have to go into this topic if you don't want to, but I remember you guys got a terrible term sheet. Do you want to talk about that and what was terrible about it?
And
we talked about it because I was kind of, sometimes when you're fundraising, it's like you get the deal you get, so you have to decide if you want to take it.
Right.
But that one was like also, it just had so many things that were challenging with it. And we don't need to name firms, but what was that experience like?
Well, the audio didn't match the video on the on what we'd talked about versus what got what got handed in. But
I mean, there were like a lot of restrictions on it, and especially for, you know, early stage startup, they wanted to do like a complete diligence process, you know, make us spend like 50 plus K on legal resources, which, you know, is good in some ways, right? Like you're growing up at the start, you're legitimizing yourself in a lot of ways, but it would slow down kind of the sales process. And then, you know, there were some other terms in there as well that I can't quite recall that I think were pretty restrictive as well. Yeah. So
yeah.
High equity, low dollar amount. I think might have been.
and I think it was a lot of control, if I remember.
Huge.
It was
they wanted
away.
2 board seats, and
Yeah. So how did you guys? Was it a hard decision to walk away, or like what was the discussion like as a team between the two of you? Maybe.
Yeah. Well, luckily at the time we had, you know, offers from some of these angels, and this was another reason why we chose to go for that smaller tranche of capital than the larger one. We realized that if we can do a little bit more de-risking, we can bring in an institutional check later that is more conducive with our ability to grow and scale faster. And so that's kind of the decision process that we made.
For my part, I was just irritated that we wasted so much time, you know.
The most precious asset for any entrepreneur. Yeah.
Yes. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think that term sheet was kind of reflective of maybe a Houston investor mindset, or was that a special case?
Well, there is that Houston investor mindset that they don't want to work with safes or secure. Was it? I forget.
Safe
simple agreement for equity.
Yeah.
Most Houston investors either want to do priced rounds or convertible notes. Priced rounds just means you have to do a lot more diligence and put a lot more a bigger business case into justifying what your valuation is. I do think there is a difference between some Houston investors and investors elsewhere, in that a lot of them are coming from oil and gas and kind of looking at what we're doing in the climate clean energy space as akin to that. But there's a lot of differences in what we're doing, right? Like the returns on a per project level are not going to be 30-40% necessarily, right? And the structures are a little bit different as well.
And I guess that's a question of like, do the Houston investors need to evolve, or are they having enough deal flow in traditional energy so they don't need to look outside or adapt? That's kind of the question.
Yeah, that's that kicking and screaming argument again, right? You know, I mean, I think Houston investors are very astute, and Mihir's trying to make the point that, you know, they're used to very high rates of, you know, oil and gas rates of return, right? You know, projects like this, you know, don't have that, but, you know, to my point earlier, is you got to tell them you can't put your head in the sand. You have to do something, and you should do something. You can put a solar array in Guyana and be green, but it's not really doing better with what you have, right?
Yep.
This is fixing, you know, what you got.
Yeah, and I would say, like, to your question, Jason, it's less about the change needed on the Houston investors and more about the change needed on like the corporates who are actually buying or being the off taker on these projects. A lot of them, you know, candidly are greenwashing. right? They'll have these targets, but there's no teeth to them. Internally, they're not using a carbon costs or carbon pricing to use for their decision making, and therefore there's no real like strong incentive to move forward with these things, even if they're economic, even if we're providing value, because we're being judged against an oil and gas project.
Mm. That reminds me, I think we were at a roundtable once, and you had this great quote around one of these majors bought a climate tech project or something, and it moved their stock price. Do you remember which one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You want to repeat that?
So it was actually Sean and Criterion
okay.
Energy. So when they got an investment from this driller, which is a public company, I forget the name of it, but they made that investment, and a couple of days later they announced it, and it was like a bump to their stock price.
Yeah, and I guess they're so large from a capitalization standpoint, it dwarfs anything around the capital invested. Right?
I think it was like $1 million, and then their market cap went up like 80 million.
Yeah, that's one ROI you can think about. So I guess where I'm pointing with this is like unfortunately the incentives for greenwashing are very high because it shows up in kind of the stock price. And obviously there are a lot of things that could have influenced that bump on that day, but I could see how that correlation shows up in the minds of the people who have to manage the stock price.
And we hope that trend continues. And I find the Houston, investors, the oil and gas community to be pretty astute. Investors. And, you see them around Greentown all the time. We're at Greentown Labs, and the resource there, by the way, is fantastic for us. The exposure that we get to some of the, biggest and best companies in the world is awesome. So we're very big fans there. But you're talking to a faction of the company that doesn't run the pipeline company. So that's where you kind of figure out where do you start? Do you start at the business unit or you start at the sustainability side? But we hope that sadly the some of the projects haven't been a lot of follow through in the oil and gas space over the last couple of years. Right, there was a big exuberance to get into it, and people were getting bought up left and right. All these sustainability, companies within the company or, groups within the company were getting fired up. And I don't see that kind of follow through happening as good as I'd hoped.
Yeah. Well, just as a reflection on industry, I was talking to my ex-Shell colleagues, and he was sharing with me that when they get projects that come up before FID, it's like a 5% yield rate. Like things get killed along the way, even good projects, because at the end of the day, there's limited time, there's limited capital. Are we just perceiving that like 95% of us are getting killed along the way because only 5% make it, or is this is there another source of that hesitation? That's kind of an open-ended question.
It's fun to talk about being green. It's it's another thing deploying. Like I said earlier, this is any green project is elective surgery.
Okay.
You might love to have it, but do you need it? And so right now with the interest rates higher, there's been some setbacks, and generally when oil prices are high, people are ginning to make oil, right?
Oh yeah, especially now.
Yeah, right. So I think that they haven't taken their hands off the steering wheel completely, but I wish they'd get back to a more mindset where this becomes more important.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're seeing some unfortunate news that some of these companies are starting to lay off some of their like low carbon solutions teams. I think Shell was one. TC had some layoffs too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we usually ask our guests, if they have climate impact story that they want to share with us, like why are they motivated to work on these solutions? So I was curious about you, Mihir, and John. Why are you doing this?
Oh, you've heard mine. So I was a power trader back in the 90s, and the company I worked for was Reliant, and we bought some power plants in Southern California. And I recall that the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, LA Times, Houston Chronicle basically said, "Bumpkins buy power plants."
That's a great headline.
not really, but we overpaid all this stuff. Well, we ran them well. 5 or 6 smart guys and gals got together and we ran them very well. And I think you know what happened after that. But about a year into it, they realized, or someone realized, that there was these RTCs, reclaim trading credits, and it says trading on there. Can one of you dumb traders look at this thing? And since I'd read gas tariffs, I looked at the thing and I said, I got some good news and I got some bad news. The good news is you can continue to make power, but the bad news is you owe them like $7 million, that you got to pay. And it was the South Coast Air Quality Management's Reclaim Program, which was the NOx and SOx program for Southern California. And since I'd read the rules, I had the honor to trade those, and it never left me. So from 97 all the way through, and I left there and started my own trading company, and we traded physical oil and gas, just the usual suspect stuff. But we did one very esoteric thing. We kept on trading emissions through that time. So in the mid 2000s, we were green when green wasn't cool. And so I've had an emission trade on my personal ticket or my company ticket since 1997. And my wife and I kept an apartment in LA during that time and watched the air get cleaner.
Wow. Wow. So. That's fascinating. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you. What about you, Mihir?
Yeah. How I got into climate. So I'm in the clean energy space. My whole career started in the lab working on different things related to solar cells and energy storage. But really what galvanized myself into the industry was just understanding like the impact it could make on power costs, right? Like if you're leveraging these wasted energy sources or free energy from wind and solar, we should be able to engineer the capital cost down far enough to make it much, much cheaper than oil and gas, right? And if you've looked at the massive amount of economic development that oil and gas has spurred across the world, what's that going to unlock for the rest of the population in the world when we can get power even below that, right? Like energy is the sustenance of our society. How many people can we bring out of poverty with that? So
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. When you think about like our Houston innovation ecosystem, what are you most proud of?
So, Jason, you're the one who got me to move here.
From Mexico City.
Yeah.
It wasn't that far.
Not Mexico City. I was on the beach.
Okay.
So.
Okay, that's a hard draw.
Yeah.
Were you surfing is the question.
Sometimes.
Okay.
But really it's the talent. Like just the amount of folks, like people like John who have this experience in oil and gas and can take their skill set and help us deploy these clean energy and climate solutions. It's unparalleled, right? And like another thing with the Houston investors, like they really understand project development, which is not something that Silicon Valley really understands, right? The whole bubble of clean tech 1.0 VC investing was the fact that you couldn't get these technologies deployed because of the regulatory issues and policy issues and then permitting and stuff like that. Well, all these folks have been developing oil and gas projects for decades, right? And so bringing that expertise into the clean energy industry or climate to deploy these solutions, I think is unparalleled.
And then how did you guys meet?
So I was actually trying to sell John when he was at his other perch at this pipeline company called Southcross on buying one of our solutions, trying to be our first customer. And so he got on the phone. He was happy to meet with me. He was gracious enough to take his time. And I spent an hour pitching him. And at the end of the call, he said, "So this is a fantastic idea. I love what you're doing here. But unfortunately, we just sold to Targa Energy. So I don't really have authority to buy your solution." And then
to my defense, I was in my transition period finding the end of the internet when he called up.
Wow.
But it was a good, I really liked the offering. So
the right time and right place and the right people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we needed someone with John's charisma, leadership qualities, and experience to help.
So who made the first move though? Like, was it
it's like founder dating.
Yeah, because like, did you say, "Hey, are you looking for a co-founder here?" Or how did it happen?
Yeah, well, it was basically like once John expressed interest, we We got lunch one day at this sushi restaurant that
was it Uchi?
No, is that poke sushi
That place is
burrito place like right next to
right on Montrose.
No, like right off of Main near that taco spot.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It closed down.
Yeah.
We were so disappointed when it closed down.
That was, that was like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It closed down or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we just had a heart to heart. John had, obviously mentioned that he's kind of looking for his next thing, and we needed someone like John. So just the marriage kind of fit.
Yeah.
Good. Good. Are there any hidden gems that people need to know about other than poke places that went out of business?
In Houston.
In Houston?
Yeah.
Ooh. There's so one of John's daughters is a sommelier, and so she turned me onto this wine bar called Light Years, and they only sell natural wines, and they have like all these books like on how natural wines are created and whatnot, and so it's like an educational experience going there, just learning about all of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
What do you
She
got?
didn't talk to me about that. I don't have any gems.
No, it doesn't have to be food related. I don't know if there's anything else. You've been here long enough. You must know some secret hidden.
Or your favorite place in Houston?
Yeah.
What about the Indian spot in the tunnels?
Oh, right.
Ooh, tell us about this.
There's an Indian spot in the tunnels that if you don't get there by 11:15, you're in line behind a bunch of Indians, which is a great thing.
That's how it's legit.
It's great. Right.
Yeah.
So that's good. I think for us, my wife and I have been going to Carrabba's on Wednesday night for Osabuco night for 25 years. And I think that's the best meal in town per capita.
Wow.
A good time.
And it's a lot of oil and gas people there on Wednesday nights. And it's the one on Kirby.
Yeah.
Only the one on Kirby.
Nice. Okay. I have a insider question. How do you navigate the tunnels? Because I get lost every time I go down there. And I don't know if I'm walking in a circle sometimes.
I never get lost down there.
Okay. So is that experience? No.
No, I always get lost.
We always get lost. I think it's the lack of sun where I can't orient which way is north anymore. I don't know. Anyhow. All right. So I shouldn't feel bad about getting lost is what I'm hearing.
Right.
Good. I've only been down there a couple times. So yeah.
Okay.
I'm just following.
But if you want to go to the Indian place, it's 1,000 Main. Go down under the tunnels, 1,000 Main.
All right.
You'll get there. It's
Gotta
fantastic.
try that out.
Got Maori, I think.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I guess as we're wrapping up, is there one thing the audience here can help you with your goals for the next year?
If anybody, has a site that they think that this will work, we're certainly looking for deployments.
Yeah. And one interesting thing that we didn't really touch on is like our first deployment with the University of Illinois is actually not just a demonstration of this system, but also a broader long duration storage system. And so if you're familiar with compressed air energy storage, you're essentially compressing air into a salt cavern and then decompressing it when electricity prices are high. Well, there's going to be a lot of pipelines that are stranded assets as we move forward in the energy transition. And our solution takes those existing assets and the existing infrastructure using, software that we're developing to compress whether it's air or another fluid into an existing pipe and then decompressing it with our system to create that long duration storage. And so, we're pretty bullish on what that can unlock market wise, and are, looking forward, as John said, to other folks that are interested in having these systems deployed.
Interesting. Very interesting. And where can they find you guys on the internet?
We're pressurecorp.com. So with a P, Pressure Corp.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Pretty easy.
Well, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it. It was a good time.
Thank you.